Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Amaewhule. Now to the week that was, and it's been a week of upheaval across Nigeria's political and social landscape, with pressure points cutting deep. In Port Harcourt, tensions in Rivers State have escalated once again as the House of Assembly pushes ahead with impeachment proceedings against Governor Sim Fubara and his deputy, raising sharp questions about constitutional accountability, power, and political vendetta. Nigerians also marked January 15th, both the anniversary of the country's first military coup and Armed Forces Remembrance Day, forcing a sobering reflection on force, governance, and the fragility of constitutional order. In elite political circles, the defection of a son of former Vice President Atiku Abubakar to the APC signaled shifting alignments ahead of 2027. And beyond politics, national grief followed the tragic death of the young son of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, reigniting calls for urgent healthcare reform. And even as the federal government speaks of economic consolidation, millions in the Northeast face what the UN calls the worst hunger crisis in a decade. And with me to look back at the week that was are two commentators who are experts at scouring those headlines. And they are the policy strategist and global CEO of the global investment and trade company, Baba Yusuf, and the political and current affairs commentator and professor of communications at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Adeniyi. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for coming in. And let me start with you, Prof. What's your take on the latest impeachment moves in Rivers State? Are the impeachment moves against Governor Fubara about constitutional accountability, or are we seeing impeachment as a political weapon?
I think the Rivers crisis has become, a bad coin, in our body politic. It's one kind of crisis we'll have been glad to stop hearing about, And I wonder which other political crises have been so difficult, so intractable like the Rivers one. And straight to your question, it's okay to begin to imagine whether it's about constitutional infraction or whether it's politically motivated. That looks academic to me, because the straight response will have been that it is just politically motivated. And we know the powers that houses of assemblies have. It doesn't matter what infraction is, what constitutional breach, what it is. It is the court that will eventually decide, But it is whatever they say is right, that is right, and whatever they say is wrong, that is wrong. And that's the pain of democracy. They are the majority. They can do and undo, even though the minority is not happy. Of course, in this circumstance, the executive, represented by Fubara, is the minority. It cannot be happy because we know there's much more to it than meet the eyes. And overall, we know where the crisis is coming from.
Right.
We know how it started. But what will have happened if we want to lay this crisis to rest, or if we want to just stop hearing about this recurrent crisis, which is a major distraction to the body politic and, of course, to our democratic process, and can also be very inimical on the longer run, is for us to have a consequential presidential intervention. Mark my words, consequential presidential intervention. If we have that, I think we can nip, the snowballing crisis in the polls. But if it continues like this, then of course we don't know where we're headed.
Right. Let me come to you, Baba Yusuf. We've seen the lawmakers shifting positions. Mm-hmm. What does that tell us about the strength of Nigeria's democratic institutions at the state level?
Well, it still remains a tool for the political class to play their game and insist they have to have their way. Like Prof mentioned, we know where this is coming from. And like I mentioned in today's episode of my weekly back page column on the Nation newspaper, I said this is a game, a fight to finish. Minister Williamson Wike has taken this very recalcitrant position, despite the several interventions by Mr. President, even in his favor. Charles, it got to the point where Mr. President had to take the tough decision of suspending the democratic institutions in Rivers for 6 months. So obviously, it is a fight to finish. Now, if you look at the entire game plan now, some days ago, We saw some of them shifting ground. Today they did an about face. If you go and look at the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 as amended, Charles, we all know that chapter 6, section 191 provided for, the speaker to take over in the event that the governor and the deputy are impeached. You can now see the concept of putting forward the names of the governor and the deputy governor for impeachment. And we know the Martin Amaewhule, group, in the House are obviously playing the game of Minister Wike. So Wike want to basically upend Fubara and his team and bring his stooge into office by virtue of this impeachment. And that also will open now a conversation with regards to now the quote and unquote what I call infestation of the APC by the foray of Fubara and Amaewhule into APC. What will happen to the power dynamics within the APC at national and subnational level if this happens, with the verbal attack of Wike on the national leadership of the All People Progressives Congress? And now you will have possibly, if this happens, that is conditional if it happens, and Amaewhule now imagine as the acting governor, and the rest is history. But then let me land with this.
Briefly.
We have 2 or 3 milestones that are critical to this impeachment, whether it happens or not. Keying it to what the presidential intervention that Prof was talking about. The CJ of Rivers will now have to do, Chief Judge has to do the needful, and now bring in these 7, personalities to look at this. That is one of the possible saving grace we have for the judiciaries to now be above board and save the democratic institutions in Rivers. The days ahead will be very interesting.
At this point, we'll just have to watch and see what happens. Let me come back to you, Prof, and let's change direction, because January the 15th, which was barely 24 hours ago, marks both the first military coup and Armed Forces Remembrance Day. I mean, decades on, has Nigeria truly subordinated force to constitutional rule? Because, I mean, the point that was being made by my first guest, Ayo Opadokun, author of The Gun Hegemony, I mean, going beyond the other things he was talking about, is that it hasn't.
Yeah, I think to some extent I agree with the author, your first guest, that we still have vestiges of military rule around us, even though indirectly. And this is likely to continue for some time, given the number of time they spend in government. But having said that as well, Paul Connaughton wrote a canonical book on how nations forget. They eventually did another one on how nations remember. One way that nations remember is through memorializing, through rituals, like the one that happened yesterday, January 15th. And it is very, very important for us, not to forget the memories of our fallen heroes. Indeed. Because there's no nation that can be stabilized, that can be sustained, without the security architecture, like we often like to say. So the military is very, very important. And of course, we know where we are in this country now. We are probably here discussing now because of the sacrifices they have been making over the years, and they are still continuing, and the times are even there. So they are even making much more of it, These are an institution, personnel that you can never forget. Having a special day like January 15th, it's a monument, that deserves all the attention that we can actually muster, but again, like we keep saying, we are not doing enough, to really memorialize them, to reward them. And this comes again to the realm of transparency and accountability, which I'm sure the authorities are addressing, like they've always told us.
Well, you can't really fault what Prof is saying there, can you? I mean, we really have to do more to remember the soldiers and the armed forces of this country.
Absolutely. And to add context to what Obadokun mentioned, I think we should also expand our, vision to this issue, Charles, because while we are diminishing the power of the guns of the military, quote unquote, or the armed forces, as it were, we should also recognize that the actions of the politicians in a democratic or so-called democratic setting has opened a new vista of armaments and the guns of the militants,
Indeed.
the guns of the political thugs, and the guns of the bandits and the terrorists that are holding sway and actually leveraging and sometimes influencing political outcomes
Well, he
in
made
Nigeria.
that point, didn't he?
Very well. So to that extent, yes, that is still. But the sad thing is now it has moved more from the state actors, quote and unquote, the armed forces, to non-state actors, these terrorists and bandits. And how the politicians recognize that in, first of all, delivering the mandate that is given to them, and secondly, hobnobbing, for the bad ones against them, hobnobbing with these political thugs and the militants is what has brought us to where we are today,
right.
Not just in Nigeria, in the Sahel region. So their delivery of good governance is crucial in changing this narrative
Indeed.
and changing this reality.
Right, and let's talk about those politicians, or at least some of them, because the defection of a son of the former Vice President Atiku Abubakar to the APC grabbed quite a bit of headlines. How politically significant is that?
Well, I think it's just, the statement is rather louder than the substance. At the end of the day, it may just be like what Shakespeare told us, something that is full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. Because with due respect to him, I never heard much of him until this time. I never knew if he was
a lot of people would agree with that. Yes.
It's just a statement, just to strike at the opposition leader, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar. And by the way, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar is a polygamist. He's been blessed with many children. So one of them defecting. At the end of the day, if you want to look at it from the realistic point of view, may not really matter.
Okay, well, let's
it's just
not,
the statement of it.
Let's not dwell too much on that, although I'll give you a chance to talk about it and to tell us whether you think it's symbolism, strategy, or just noise.
I think it's symbolism and noise. Why so? Because it's becoming a norm. Currently in Kano State, one of the remaining critical political colossus in Nigeria, Alhaji Tanko Yakase, who celebrated his 100th year birthday, is a political colossus that have a home, interestingly, that has a big bag of politicians. Currently, you have a senior special assistant to President Tinubu on community engagement, Honorable Abdullahi Tanko Yakase, is in the ruling party, and you have the man we call popularly the Dawisu, Alhaji Salihu, Tanko Yakase, who was, a special advisor to Gonduje during his days as governor, who was a gubernatorial candidate in the PRP in the 2023 elections. So I think it's symbolism on the part of APC to throw a jab at Atiku to say, we've taken one of your sons. And I don't think I think it's just hot air. Because what is fundamental is what are the structures that this gentleman has. By the way, Atiku also has children that are in the PDP, that we have a commissioner in Adamawa State that is currently a commissioner of works. But I think that is just a news flash that will just keep people spiced up for the weekend.
Okay, well, let's turn to the tragic death of the writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's son, which sparked nationwide grief. How do you react to that?
Oh, very, very unfortunate, very saddening, and of course, we cannot stop commiserating with that illustrious writer on the death of her cherished son. Very unfortunate, really, but it's another sad reminder of our system. But where we're also mourning our system as being derelict, being negligent, we should also be careful, because there are instances where our medics have been very, very outstanding. Sometimes we also look at it within the atmosphere, within the circumstances in which we're all working as professionals. There are difficulties that surround us, but what should be brought out in the circumstances that individuals, individual professionals, should continue to do their best, in all circumstances. And of course, anytime they imagine that something is falling apart, they shouldn't just proceed just because they want to justify their status, as the case could be. But finally, Charles, look at what happened to Chimamanda Adichie. Remember what happened to the boxer too, and to the Jesuit. These are diasporic citizens or circular migrants. This is one thing that actually discourages people,
Very true.
from returning as migrants, And it's a major reminder on the need for us to tighten our system.
That's a very
and
good
prevent
point.
these tragedies from happening.
Let me come to you on that, Baba Yusuf. Why does it so often take elite tragedy to focus attention on things like Nigeria's healthcare failures?
Brilliant question, Charles. Thank you for asking me that question, because that is what I actually wanted to say. It is very tragic and sad. My condolences to Lady Chimamanda for this tragedy. But this is a tragedy with profound respect out of thousands and thousands of Nigerians that are dying. I mean, just last week it was all over the social media. It was in the city of Kano, where I come from. A lady died, an unwarranted death. Sadly, Charles, the surgeon left scissors in her stomach, and she tragically died, of that. And the truth is, over time, these things happen and there are no consequences. It is a sad tragedy of our medical practice in Nigeria, which is also a reflection of other sectors. In terms of regulation, in terms of the services, in terms of the infrastructure. Today, the body that is supposed to oversee negligence and professional malpractice in the medical practice is practically overseen by the medical practitioners themselves. There is no outsider, there is no spread to ensure there's accountability, ensure there's probity. And these are the gaps we have in the system, from the government side and from the practitioner side. I can tell you clearly, the medical practice is the area we need to really look at. Yes, while we agree there is need for us to support them to deliver, but there's a lot that is left to be desired with regards to the conduct of the people within the medical practice, whether it is the doctors or the nurses or the ancillary services.
Well, let's move on. We're almost out of time. So as pithily as you can, as briefly, let's turn to the economy. The federal government says the economy is entering a phase of consolidation, to quote the minister there. Yet the UN warns of the worst hunger crisis in a decade in the Northeast. Which really should Nigerians believe?
Maybe both. Maybe both will try to reach a compromise. On the part of government, I think if they are making that conclusion, they probably have reasons to make it, because we are witnessing some relative stability in the macroeconomic sector. And MBS just came out with some figures yesterday after
That's the Bureau of Statistics.
After sampling about 10,000 markets. So the statistics are looking right, but what the problem is actually the connection, finding the connection between the statistics and reality. As the World Bank is probably saying that it's been reflected or is going to be reflected in the Northeast. So while we're having the contradictions, the onus is on the authorities, the managers of the economy, to now find a marriage between the two potential discrepancy. Yes, the figures are looking right or looking good, as the statistics are saying, but how do we ensure that the figures reflect in the real life, lived experiences of citizens?
Indeed. And a final
global
thought from
investment
you
is
that, do you detect a disconnect between the narratives of reform and the lived hardships of people?
At Global Investment and Trade Company, GITC, we call it dimensioning the issues. That is what is the gap. Within that report, Charles, good news, the outlook on macroeconomic 4.4 growth, 2026, 2027 and all that. But the World Bank is putting the caveat to say, yes, this is going good, looking good, but then there are some critical structural things that need to be done. And they were clear in that report to talk about what we have been consistently saying. The fiscal indiscipline, Charles, needs to be addressed for you to actually achieve that connection you are talking about, with the man on the street, the people in the village to feel the impact, and to ensure that the growth happens. 4.4 growth, with profound respect, Charles, is not the growth rate we need for Nigeria to get out of poverty in the next 2-3 years. We need at least 7 to 8% growth to achieve that. So while the growth is looking good on paper, the growth in reality is actually supposed to be double that for us to get out of the doldrums. You heard the alarm about the poverty that will escalate in the Northeast. Don't forget, we already have over 144 million multidimensional poor Nigerians, reflecting over 60% of our population in a year that is building up to election year, at a time that we have about 1.8 trillion naira backlog of payment to contractors, local and international. So they need to redimension that. I'm talking about government now, to ensure that that fiscal discipline is brought into the table, and to ensure that we are able to catalyze the production to achieve the actual growth rate that will take us to that 1 trillion dollar economy that we need.
I was going to give him the last word, but I've just been told I have an extra minute, so I'm going to give that to you. If nothing changes, based on what you've heard him say, based on what you have said, which of all these pressure points is most likely to tip this country into a wider national crisis?
That's a very tough one. You know, but I think we should just be more concerned about our macroeconomics, you know, the security situation. That looks the more concerning, the more worrisome.
You've literally got 20 seconds.
Yeah, and of course, you could see where it has led us to. We're having foreign intervention, you know, from someone like Donald Trump. You know, and if that one escalates, we do not know the extent to which it will go.
Right.
So I think we should be mindful of our security. If we're able to deal with it, there will be peace, and of course, we can flourish again.
Okay, quick, 10 seconds.
Deal with insecurity. Be more sensible to the sensitivities and sensibilities of Nigeria. Focus more on catalyzing microeconomic performance in connection with the macro. If you over put your focus too much on the macro and forget about the micro, you will not achieve the consolidation.
Okay. Baba Yusuf is the policy strategist and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company, and Professor Adeniyi is the political and current affairs commentator and professor of communications at Bayes University in Abuja. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, pleasure.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again next week. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and Lagos, bye-bye and thank you for watching.